I've always prided myself on being a diligent financial analyst. My name is Zack, and have put in countless hours in that busy, high-pressure environment in Boston's financial district. The life I've built with my wife, Amelia, has been a source of immense pride and comfort. But lately, something has started to bother me that I can no longer turn a blind eye to. It all started with a subtle change in Amelia's behavior. She became distant, always glued to her cell phone and unusually secretive about her whereabouts. At first, I blamed it on the stress of her job at the prestigious advertising agency, but as each day passed, the uneasiness in my heart grew stronger. I got home earlier than usual that night, exhausted from a day of market analysis and client meetings. Just as I stepped into our cozy apartment in Beacon Hill, I saw Amelia scrambling to hide her cell phone with a forced smile. It was at that moment that the uneasiness in my mind turned into tangible doubt. "Hey, you're home early today," Amelia said, her voice a little higher than usual. "Bad day at work?" I nodded, my eyes lingering on where Amelia had hidden her cell phone. "Yeah, there's been a problem with Miller's accounts. How about you? How was your day?" Amelia's reply was half a beat slow. "Oh, it's the same as always. We're working on a new advertising project, and it's pretty busy." We sat opposite each other for dinner. On the table was our favorite pasta, but I could hardly taste the old flavor. Amelia ate while absent-mindedly looking at the plants around the table. I tried to find something to say to break the uncomfortable silence. "Should we go for a walk on the beach next weekend?" I asked tentatively. Amelia looks like she's woken up from a dream. "Oh, the beach." She hesitated. "Probably not. I might have to work late next weekend. You know, this project is important." I nodded, not pursuing the question. It was a strange feeling, as if there was suddenly an invisible wall between us. We used to talk about everything, but now even a simple dinner seemed so awkward. After dinner, Amelia took it upon herself to clean up the dishes, which was counterintuitive. I sat on the couch in the living room and pretended to watch TV, but in reality my attention was on Amelia's every move in the kitchen. I heard the faucet running, dishes clinking together, and what seems to be the sound of a cell phone vibrating. Amelia's back froze for a moment, then continued wiping her plate as if nothing had happened. I clenched my fists and forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe Amelia was really just stressed out from work. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the uneasy feeling lingered. That night, I tossed and turned and had trouble sleeping. Amelia beside me was breathing evenly and seemed to be sleeping soundly. I looked at the ceiling, thinking back over our little moments, trying to figure out when it was that this rift between us began. Unfortunately, I couldn't find an answer, only more questions and unease. Saturday morning, I woke up early to get ready for a trip to the neighborhood grocery store. We had arranged for some old friends to come over for a barbecue this afternoon. Amelia was still asleep, so I gingerly headed out the door. When I got back from shopping, I found Amelia up and about in the kitchen. "Good morning," I said. "I got some beer and meat." Amelia looked back and smiled. "Great. By the way, I might have to go out. Lisa asked me to go shopping, and I promised to help her pick out a dress." I frowned. "Today? But we're meeting friends for a barbecue." "I know," Amelia said. "I'll be back early to make sure I don't delay the barbecue." I sighed and didn't say anything else. Amelia hurried out the door, leaving me alone to prepare for the barbecue. Time passes by, and I look at my watch frequently. It was 3 p.m., Amelia's promised return time, but she hadn't shown up yet. I sent her a text, and she replied that she was stuck in traffic and would be there soon. My friends arrived one by one, and I entertained them with a forced smile, but I was restless. Amelia didn't come back until nearly 5 o'clock. She looked exhausted, not at all like she had been shopping all day. "I'm sorry," she said. "The road was really backed up." I noticed her hands were empty. "Didn't get anything?" Amelia froze for a moment. "Oh." In the end, none of it felt quite right, so I didn't buy it. Later in the evening, when Amelia went to the restroom, I ghosted through her bag. Inside was a small shopping receipt for a small amount of money dated this afternoon. I felt my heart sink. After the barbecue, we sent off the last of our friends. I was going to talk to Amelia, but looking at how tired she looked, the words came out of my mouth and I swallowed. The next day was a work day. I went to work as usual, but my mind was not on work at all. In the afternoon, I suddenly decided to surprise Amelia by buying takeout from her favorite Italian restaurant and going straight to her office. I stood in front of the ad agency building, my heart racing. In the elevator, I straightened my tie, hoping to surprise Amelia. But when I walked into her office, I found it empty and the lights off. I pulled out my cell phone and called Amelia. She picked up with a hint of panic in her voice. "Zack, what's wrong? I'm at your work and wanted to surprise you. Where are you?" There was silence on the other end of the line for a second. Then Amelia said, "Oh, I just got out of a meeting and was heading back to the office. Just give me a minute." I stood in the dimly lit office, carrying takeout that had gotten a little cold, with mixed feelings. 10 minutes later, Amelia came running in, panting. "Zack, what brings you here?" she asked, a slightly unnatural expression on her face. I handed her the takeout, "Wanted to surprise you." Amelia took the takeout and forced a smile. "Thank you, that's sweet." We finished the dinner relatively speechless. On the way home, I drove, my mind replaying the events of the past few days. Amelia sat in the passenger side, her eyes closed. I stole a glance at her, and suddenly she felt so far away from me. That night, I lay in bed and couldn't sleep for a long time. I knew that I had to take action, or this suspicion would destroy our marriage completely. But what was I to do? Confront them directly? Or continue to observe in secret? I closed my eyes, my heart full of contradictions and uneasiness. I decided to take a more proactive approach to the situation. That Saturday, Amelia told me she was going to a new restaurant in town with some female coworkers. I could have chosen to believe her, but my inner turmoil drove me to do something I never thought I would do. I drove to the restaurant and parked across the street. Heart racing, I felt like a ridiculous stalker. But when I saw Amelia and her friends walk into the restaurant, a wave of relief washed over me. Maybe I'm really overthinking this? However, this sense of relief didn't last long. Through the large windows of the restaurant, I saw Amelia sitting by the window. She was smiling so happily, her eyes sparkled, and her whole being radiated a glow I hadn't seen in a long time. Then I noticed that she kept her gaze fixed on a man across the room. I've never seen that man before. He was handsome, well-dressed, and had a confident demeanor. I saw him say something and Amelia burst out laughing. At that moment, I felt my heart clench hard. I sat in the car for a long time until they finished their meal and walked out. Amelia and the man walked at the end, the distance between them uncomfortably close. As they parted, the man gently touched Amelia's arm, and I saw a flicker of an expression on Amelia's face that was familiar to me, a look that she had once shown only to me. When I got home, I fidgeted. When Amelia returned, I tried to control my emotions and pretended as if nothing had happened by asking, "How was dinner?" Amelia replied slightly tiredly, "It's not bad. The food at the new restaurant is quite good." I nodded absent-mindedly, then asked, "Are they all female coworkers?" Amelia paused for a moment, then said, "Yeah, they all usually work together." I felt my throat tighten, but managed to force a smile. Sounds good. That night, I tossed and turned. Amelia's lies echoed in my ears, and I didn't know how to face this reality. The next morning, before Amelia left the house when she wasn't looking, I quietly picked up her cell phone. I knew it was wrong, but I needed to know the truth. The phone didn't have a password, which surprised me. I took a deep breath and tapped on the text message. Soon enough, I found what I was looking for, a contact named Nathan. With trembling fingers, I tapped on their conversation. Reading those messages, I felt the world crumble beneath me. Intimate words, secret date plans, even some ambiguous photos. My wife was engaged in a passionate affair with another man. Yet I didn't have an immediate showdown with Amelia, knowing that this information alone wasn't enough for me to fully understand the truth. I needed more evidence, more conclusive evidence, to uncover the full picture of what was going on. I don't know how I got through that day, but I tried to act like it was business as usual. When Amelia came home in the evening, I could barely look her in the eye. She asked me what was wrong, and I just shook my head and told her that I was stressed at work. That night, I lay in bed feeling so strange with Amelia lying next to me. I thought about our wedding and the vows we had made. Now, All of those wonderful memories were colored by betrayal. I knew I had to make a decision. Should I confront Amelia directly? Or gather more evidence? Or should I end the marriage? These questions swirled around in my head, keeping me awake. I looked at the ceiling and felt like I was standing at a crossroads in my life, and the road ahead was full of unknowns and pain. I sat in my study late at night a few days later, the blue light of my computer screen illuminating my tired face. The night view of Boston filtered in through the window, a mixture of bustle and loneliness. I typed "private investigator" into the search engine and hesitantly clicked on it. I browsed through the websites of one detective agency after another, my heart filled with ambivalence. Was this really what I wanted? To hire a stranger to investigate my wife? But every time I thought back to Amelia's intimate interactions with the man in the restaurant and those sweet nothings on Amelia's cell phone, I felt like I had no choice. In the end, I selected a detective agency that looked more professional. Early the next morning, I called them and arranged a meeting time. In the afternoon, I arrived at the Boston Public Library. I chose this place because it was both public and private for such a sensitive meeting. I sat in a corner of the reading room and pretended to be reading, but in reality my heart was beating like thunder. "Mr. Zack?" A low voice rang in my ears. I looked up to see a middle-aged man, plainly dressed but with sharp eyes. "I'm Michael, the investigator you contacted on the phone." We found a secluded corner and sat down. Michael got right to the point. "Mr. Zack, can you elaborate on your situation?" I took a deep breath and told him exactly what I had suspected and discovered during this time. Telling these truths made me feel both relieved and agonized. Michael listened carefully and then said, "I understand your situation. We will conduct our investigation in the most careful manner and collect all possible evidence. But Mr. Zack, I must warn you that sometimes the truth can be harsh. Are you sure you want to be ready for it?" I looked him in the eye and nodded firmly. "I need to know the evidence and the truth, no matter how painful it is." The next few weeks went by with me in a state of distraction. Every morning when I walked Amelia out the door, I wondered if she was really going to work. Every time she worked late, I couldn't help but wonder if she was with that Nathan guy. This suspicion was agonizing, and I desperately needed proof and real truth. Michael sends me short reports periodically. For the most part, Amelia's schedule seemed normal, but occasionally, there were a few suspicious details. A long lunch break, an overtime, shift away from the office. These bits and pieces of information were like razor blades, cutting into my heart bit by bit. Finally, in the third week of the investigation, Michael contacted me to say he had made an important discovery. We arranged to meet on the banks of the Charles River. It was drizzling that day, and the river was white and foggy. I saw Michael standing by the river, holding a thick brown envelope. "Mr. Zack," he said, a hint of sympathy in his voice, "here's all the evidence we've gathered. Photographs, dating records. It's all in there. I suggest you find a quiet place to peruse them." I took the envelope, and it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Thank you, Michael." "Mr. Zack," he hesitated. "As an experienced investigator, I've seen many similar cases. My advice is to deal with whatever you see in this envelope calmly. Don't make impulsive decisions." I forced a smile. "I will, thanks." After Michael left, I stood alone by the river, staring at the envelope in my hand. The rain dampened my clothes, but I was oblivious. I knew that once I opened this envelope, my life could change forever. I took a deep breath and slowly opened the envelope. When I saw what was inside, I felt the world crumble beneath me. Pictures of Amelia and the man named Nathan being intimate. There were also recordings of their phone calls, full of love and ambiguity. What broke my heart the most was that one photo showed them looking at houses, seemingly making plans for a future together. I stood in the rain, tears mixed with rain running down my cheeks. I suddenly realized that my marriage, the one I thought would be happy forever, had come to an end. With the envelope full of evidence in hand, I walked aimlessly through the streets of Boston like a wandering soul. The rain had stopped, but the gloom was still thick inside me. I knew I needed professional help, not only to deal with the upcoming legal issues, but to help me find a way out of this emotional quagmire. Early the next morning, I dialed a lawyer recommended by a friend Jennifer Baker, one of Boston's best divorce attorneys, who was said to be not only well-versed in the law, but also in how to deal with such sensitive emotional issues. Jennifer's office is located in a towering glass building in Boston's financial district. Walking into her office, I feel like I'm stepping into a safe haven. Jennifer is a woman in her 40s with a sharp but compassionate gaze. "Mr. Thompson, have a seat." She gestured for me to take a seat in the chair across from her. "Before we begin, I want to say that no matter what the rest of this conversation reveals, remember that you are now preparing yourself for the future." I took a deep breath and placed the brown envelope on the table. It contained all the evidence. My wife. She betrayed me. Jennifer nodded softly and began to scrutinize the contents of the envelope. I watched as she flipped through the photos and documents, each one feeling like a vicious gouge in my heart. "Mr. Zack," Jennifer concluded, "based on this evidence, we do have strong grounds for filing for divorce. But before we take the next step, I need to ask you a few questions." Her eyes softened. "Are you sure you want to go down that road? Sometimes there's a chance to salvage a marriage." I laughed bitterly. "I don't know. I love Amelia, or rather, I love the Amelia I thought I knew. But now, I don't even know if the one I know is real." Jennifer nodded. "I understand. So, let's talk about your options. If you decide to get a divorce, we can start preparing the paperwork. But if you want to try to save your marriage, I suggest you seek marriage counseling first." We discussed at length the possible legal and financial implications of a divorce. Jennifer patiently answered every question I had, but I felt like my brain was mush. "Mr. Zack," Jennifer concluded, "I know this is a difficult decision. I suggest that you think about it again and not rush into a decision. In the meantime, I'll start preparing the necessary paperwork in case you decide to go the legal route." Leaving Jennifer's office, I felt both relieved and confused. I strolled into nearby Boston Harbor and watched the ships coming and going in the harbor. I think back to the first time Amelia and I came here on a date, when we were full of hope and believed our love would be as wide and deep as the ocean. Now, looking at this ocean that once held our love, I felt a pang of bitterness. I pulled out my cell phone and looked at Amelia's number, my finger hovering over the dial button. Should I call her? Tell her I already know everything? Or just end it and start a new life? I didn't end up dialing that number. I needed time. I needed to be alone. I needed to think about my future. I looked at the distant horizon and suddenly realized that no matter what decision I made, my life would be changed forever. When I got home, I started to organize my things. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew I needed to be prepared for any eventuality. In the process of organizing, I found an old photo of Amelia and I from when we were first married. I couldn't help but weep as I looked at our happy smiles in the photo. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I thought about what Jennifer had said about marriage counseling advice. Maybe I should give our marriage one last chance before making a final decision? But every time I closed my eyes, those images of Amelia and Nathan being intimate came to mind, tearing at my heart. I knew that the next few days would be a tough battle between emotion and reason. I needed to choose between love, dignity, and the future. And that choice will determine the direction of the rest of my life. In the days following my meeting with Jennifer, I was in a trance-like state. I mechanically went to work, came home, and pretended everything was normal. But every time I saw Amelia, I felt like my heart was being cut to pieces. She still didn't know that I had found out her secret and was still smiling as if nothing had happened. I didn't go straight home after work on Friday. I drove to the bank we always use. Sitting in the parking lot, I stared at the bank sign for a long time before working up the courage to walk in. "Good afternoon, Mr. Zack," the teller said with a smile. "How may I help you?" I took a deep breath. I want to take out all the deposits in my personal account. The teller was a little surprised, but nodded professionally. When she finished counting the cash and handed me a bulging envelope, I felt a wave of vertigo. It was years of my savings, originally set aside for my future with Amelia. Now it's become a tool for me to protect myself. After leaving the bank, I didn't go home immediately. I drove to the outskirts where my parents' house was. I'd rarely been back since I'd married Amelia, but now, it felt like the only place I could feel a shred of safety and comfort. My hands were shaking as I knocked on the door. Mom opened the door, and the moment she saw me, her smile froze. Zack? Did something happen? I forced a smile. Hi, Mom. Can I come in? I want to talk to you guys. Sitting in the familiar living room in front of my concerned parents, I suddenly felt a wave of powerlessness. How do I tell them that their daughter-in-law, whom they have always been proud of, has betrayed me? How do I explain that our seemingly perfect marriage was actually a fraud? Son, Dad broke the silence. No matter what happens, you know we've got your back, right? I nodded, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. I took a deep breath and then told them everything that had happened in the last few weeks: Amelia's erratic behavior, my suspicions, the private investigator's findings, and the money I had just taken out of the bank. Mom cried when she heard it, while Dad sat there with a serious expression on his face. What are you going to do? He finally asked. I shook my head. I don't know. I haven't told Amelia that I know this. I need time to think. Then, Dad said, you can leave the money here for now. We'll take good care of it. I handed Dad the envelope full of cash. The action made the whole thing so real that I felt a wave of nausea. Zack, Mom wiped a tear from her eye. Are you going to stay here for a few days? Your room has been reserved for you. I considered it for a moment, then shook my head. No, Mom. I need to go back. I need to face this. It was dark when I left my parents' house. I sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel in disbelief. I knew I should go home, but I wasn't sure I had the courage to face Amelia. I pulled out my cell phone and saw that there were several missed calls and texts, all from Amelia. Where are you? Dinner's ready. Zack, are you okay? I'm a little worried. Honey, if you see this message, please reply to me. I stared at the messages and felt a pang of bitterness. These words of concern had once warmed me, but now they were like a sharp knife stabbing my heart. I took a deep breath and started the car. It was time to go home, time to face reality. Amelia immediately greeted me when I walked in the door. Zack, where have you been? I've been worried about you. I looked at her anxious expression and felt a sudden wave of exhaustion. I just need some time alone, I said, avoiding her gaze. Amelia seems to have sensed something, and her expression becomes confused and worried. Did something happen? You look not quite right. I shook my head. It's nothing, just a stressful job. I think I need to take an early break. That night, I lay in bed, listening to Amelia's steady breathing, feeling more alone than ever. I knew that I was standing at a crossroads in my life. I needed to make a decision, but I wasn't sure I was ready for what might come next. Over the next few days, the atmosphere between Amelia and I became incredibly tense. I tried to avoid being alone with her as much as possible, excusing my busy schedule and often coming home late. Every time I saw her, I felt a twinge in my stomach. I knew this situation couldn't last long, but I didn't have the courage to reveal the truth yet. That night, I was once again working late. The house was dark when I walked in. I gingerly walked into the bedroom, assuming that Amelia was already asleep. However, just as I was about to lie down, the bedside lamp suddenly came on. Amelia sat on the bed, her eyes red and swollen, obviously having cried. Zack, we need to talk. I felt a wave of vertigo and knew that the moment of escape was finally over. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to calm my breathing. You've been avoiding me for the past few days, Amelia said, her voice trembling. What happened? Is it possible you know something? I lifted my head and looked her straight in the eyes. In that moment, I saw fear, guilt, and a glimmer of hope. I took a deep breath and decided to face the truth head-on. Amelia, I know about you and Nathan. Her face instantly turned pale. Zack, let me explain. Explain what? I laughed bitterly. Explain how you betrayed our marriage. Explain how you cheated on me. Tears streamed down Amelia's face. I didn't mean to, Zack. It just happened. I didn't know what to do. I stood up, feeling a wave of weakness. You could have told me the truth. You could have given our marriage a chance. But you chose to cheat. I'm sorry, Zack. I'm really sorry. Amelia sobbed. Do we have a chance? I look at her, the woman I once loved so much. Now, She became so strange to me. I thought about the pictures, the text messages, and how happy she was with Nathan. I don't know, Amelia. I really don't know, I said softly, but I do know that there's no going back for us now. That night, I slept on the couch in the living room. All night long, I could hear Amelia's low sobs in my bedroom. I lay there, thinking back over our little moments, feeling empty inside. The next morning, we all took a vacation. We sat at opposite ends of the table, as if an invisible wall separated us. I contacted a lawyer, I said calmly, and now we can start preparing the divorce papers. Amelia looked up with surprise and sadness in her eyes. Have you really decided? We're just going to end it? I took a deep breath. Amelia, our marriage ended a long time ago. From the moment you decided to betray me. She lowered her head, her shoulders shaking slightly. I know I made a big mistake, Zack, but can't we really give each other another chance? I looked at her and felt a sudden wave of exhaustion. Amelia, once trust is broken, it's hard to rebuild. I'm not sure I have the courage or strength to try. Over the next few days, we began our separation. I moved into a friend's apartment. Every day, I had to force myself to focus on my work and try not to think about the home that was falling apart. One day, I was in the conference room of my company, listening to my colleagues discussing their latest projects. Suddenly, I felt an intense discomfort. I hurriedly left the conference room and rushed into the restroom. Looking at my haggard self in the mirror, I suddenly realized that the stress of the period had begun to affect my health. That night, I sat alone on the balcony of my makeshift apartment, looking out over Boston at night. I thought back to the first time Amelia and I came to this city, when we were full of hope and believed that the future would be bright. Now, all those good memories had turned into irony. I picked up my cell phone and hesitated for a long time before finally dialing Amelia's number. Zack? She asked, her voice sounding tired and puzzled. Amelia, I said, feeling my throat tighten. I think we need to talk one last time. Not to salvage anything, but to say a proper goodbye. There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. Okay, Zack, that's what I thought. When I hung up the phone, I breathed a long sigh of relief. I knew that this would be the end of a painful journey and the beginning of a new life. Whatever the future holds, I must face it with courage. The divorce proceedings went much smoother than I expected, perhaps because we were both too tired to argue unnecessarily. The day I signed the last papers, Amelia and I said goodbye outside the courthouse. While her eyes were full of apologies and sadness, I felt a strange sense of relief. Take care, Zack, she whispered. I nodded. You too, Amelia. Watching her back disappear around the corner, I took a deep breath. A phase is over, but my life goes on. In the following days, I threw myself completely into my work. The day-to-day hustle and bustle made me temporarily forget the emptiness in my heart. But every late night, that feeling of loss came flooding back. I knew I needed to find a way to fill that void. One day after work, I wandered aimlessly down the street and unknowingly walked to the banks of the Charles River. The sun was setting, and the river was glittering with gold. I saw a group of people jogging in the distance, their pace neat and consistent, with smiles on their faces. At that moment, I suddenly had an idea. The next morning I signed up for amateur training camp for the Boston Marathon. On the first day of training, I was out of breath and running slower than everyone else. But strangely, instead of feeling frustrated, I had a long-lost, fulfilling feeling. Over time, my fitness has gradually improved. Every morning as I ran along the Charles River, I felt like I was not only working out, but reinventing myself. The memories and pain that once plagued me seemed to be expelled from my body along with the sweat. At work, I also found new motivation. I began to take the initiative to take on more responsibility and come up with innovative ideas. My supervisor noticed these changes and gave me the opportunity to lead a new project. Zack, you've been on a roll lately. He tapped me on the shoulder and said, I think you're perfectly capable of handling this program. I gratefully accepted the challenge. Whenever I immersed myself in my work, the haze of the past would temporarily lift. I start to find my confidence again and believe in my worth again. One day, I met Lisa from HR in the elevator at work. She surveyed me with surprise. Wow, Zack, you look great. Been working out lately? I smiled. Yeah, I'm training for a marathon. Lisa's eyes lit up. Fantastic. Our company is organizing a charity run. Would you be interested in participating? That's how I started to participate in the company's charitable activities. Every weekend, I would go to the community center with my colleagues to volunteer and help those in need. Looking at the faces that smile because of our help, I feel a sense of satisfaction that I have never felt before. At a charity event, I met a girl named Sarah. She was a social worker and was warm and cheerful. We chatted a lot, but I didn't think too much about it. Having experienced the failure of my marriage, I have learned to cherish the present and no longer have high expectations for the future. Time flew by, and a year passed in the blink of an eye. When I stood in front of the mirror again, I was surprised to find that I had completely changed. Not only did my body become firm, but there was also more determination and calmness in my eyes. That day, I ran the Boston Marathon. As I ran across the finish line, I felt a tremendous sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just a race win, it was a transcendence of my past self. At the finish line, I saw Sarah coming to cheer me on. She excitedly ran over to me and gave me a hug. Congratulations, Zack. You were awesome. I hugged her back, suddenly feeling something sprouting inside me. Perhaps there would be new possibilities in the future, but this time, I would be more cherished, more cautious. That night, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out over Boston at night. I thought about the past, the joys, the pain that had become part of what shaped the person I am now. I took a deep breath and felt the cool night breeze. I knew that no matter what the future held, I had found the strength and direction to move forward. 5 years have passed like a white horse. The seasons of Boston have witnessed the changes in my life. I have a few more strands of silver at my temples and a few lines at the corners of my eyes, but inside I am calmer and stronger than ever. This morning I was jogging along the Charles River as usual. The autumn sunlight was gently sprinkling on the river, and the leaves were beginning to yellow. I took a deep breath of the fall-tinged air and felt the rhythm of life. Just then, I saw a familiar figure coming towards me. My steps couldn't help but slow down. It was Amelia. It had been 5 years since I'd seen her, and she looked a lot different. Her hair was cut shorter, and the makeup on her face was much lighter than before. She saw me as well, and her footsteps visibly hesitated for a moment, but she walked over anyway. "Zack," she whispered, "it's been a long time." "Yeah, it's been a while," I replied, surprised at the calmness in my voice. We stood by the river, speechless for a moment. The fall wind whipped by, bringing a hint of coolness. "You look well," Amelia broke the silence. "I hear you're doing well in the company." I nodded. "Yes, life is good. How about you?" Amelia smiled bitterly. "It's okay. Me and Nathan, we broke up." I froze for a moment, not knowing what to say. There was a time when this news might have given me a twinge of vengeful pleasure, but now, I only felt a little sorry for it. "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. Amelia shook her head. "No, it's probably for the best. I've learned a lot over the years." She paused. "Zack, I owe you an apology. I'm sorry for everything I've done." I took a deep breath and looked at the woman in front of me who had once broken my heart. Suddenly, I felt the last trace of resentment in my heart dissipate. "Amelia," I whispered, "that's all in the past. We've all made mistakes and we've all grown because of them. I forgave you and myself a long time ago." Amelia's eyes flashed with surprise, followed by relief. "Thank you, Zack. You're always more forgiving than I realize." We chatted some more, mostly polite. When we finally said goodbye, we both smiled. It was a smile of relief. Watching Amelia's fading back, I suddenly realized that this might be our last meeting. But this realization didn't bring any sadness, only a calm acceptance. As I continue my morning run, my mind goes back over the years. The pain of loss, the hard work of rebuilding, the joy of a new life. All of these experiences have shaped who I am now. As I ran to the finish line, I saw Sarah waiting for me. She smiled and waved at me, her smile extra warm in the sunlight. "How was your run today?" she asked. I looked into her eyes and had a sudden urge to tell her. Something from the past came up, I said, but it feels good. Sarah took my hand. Want to talk? I nodded, feeling the warmth of her hand. I knew that I could trust her enough to confide in her about my past, my present, and our possible future. We strolled along the banks of the Charles River as I slowly recounted my story. Sarah listened quietly, gently squeezing my hand every now and then in silent support. After the lecture, we stood by the river and looked at the Boston skyline in the distance. The whole city was gilded by the sunlight. "Zack," Sarah said softly, "thank you for being willing to share this with me. I'm glad I got to know you now." I turned my head and looked her in the eyes. "I'm glad to meet you too, Sarah. Thanks for always being there for me." It was at that moment that I realized that life had given me a second chance. This time, I will cherish it more and be more attentive. I am no longer the self lost in love, but a person who has weathered the storm and is more mature and stronger. We held hands and walked in the direction of home. The fall sunlight poured gently over us, gilding our future with a glow of hope. I knew that I was ready for whatever awaited me ahead, because this time, I learned how to truly love myself and how to love others. The gift of time is not only the wounds healed, but the wisdom gained. I am grateful for every choice I have made in the past because they have ultimately brought me here, to this wonderful present moment of possibility. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.